Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, the LEED Project Series, Part 5, Documenting the Credits in the Energy and Atmosphere category. For those of you that are not familiar with 3R and our relationship with SRI, I'll give you a little background. In 1996, SRI began to incorporate environmental and CSR standards, including ISO 14001. By 2006, SRI started to incorporate its own internal CSR initiatives with the goal of improving the company and work environment for its employees. In 2008, SRI Green Building Certification was established to perform LEED project reviews for the U.S. Green Building Council and GBCI. After establishing a team with various backgrounds in the sustainability and built environment sectors and completing over 5,000 green building projects, 3R was spun off to provide consulting services in CSR and green buildings. I'm Carla Mitchell with 3R, and I've been a LEED accredited professional for about 10 years. Throughout my career of more than 20 years, I've been part of the design team for multiple LEED certified buildings. In the past 8 years, I've been working as a LEED project reviewer and consultant for SRI and 3R, overseeing a team of reviewers that have completed nearly 10,000 project phase reviews. This experience makes us uniquely qualified to have these discussions about LEED projects. So what are we going to discuss today? We'll talk about the documentation requirements of each credit, talk a little bit about energy modeling and the tools available to you, and lastly, we'll explain the requirements of the rating system and touch on some common documentation errors. What is the intent of the energy and atmosphere category? Well, it approaches energy from a holistic perspective, addressing three main concepts: energy use reduction, energy efficient design strategies, and renewable energy sources. This category is so critical to the LEED rating system for one main reason. Buildings consume an estimated 40% of the total energy used in the world. Because of this fact, focusing on how we can reduce our energy consumption is key. There are a number of things to consider when you're planning a project. Energy efficiency begins with reducing the amount of energy you plan to use by analyzing your building orientation, window selection, and choosing materials and systems that are most appropriate for the climate where your project is located. The first prerequisite in this category is fundamental commissioning and verification. The intent of this prerequisite is to support the design, construction, and eventual operation of a project that meets the owner's project requirements for energy, water, indoor environmental quality, and durability. When you're planning for this prereq, remember that all systems must be included in the commissioning scope of work. That means all HVAC systems, lighting and controls, electrical systems, service heating water, and on-site renewable systems must be commissioned. One important thing to note, even if your on-site renewable systems are located outside of your LEED project boundary, LEED requires that the system is commissioned. So if the system is operated by a third party, then it's acceptable to provide documentation to confirm that the system has been commissioned outside of your project scope, provided that that has happened within the last 5 years. Otherwise, you must include the commissioning of on-site renewable systems within your project scope. A key thing to remember is that the commissioning agent must be engaged no later than at the end of the design development phase of your project. Under LEED version 3, this requirement was not clearly spelled out, and you could bring the commissioning agent on at later stages. However, version 4 requires documentation to confirm that the commissioning agent was part of the team from the start. So when you're considering who will be the commissioning agent, remember that the person must have experience with at least 2 projects of similar scope and size. This person can be an employee of the project owner, part of the company responsible for the design, provided that person is not part of the design team, or an independent third party. Remember, the commissioning agent's role is to review and verify the components of the design to ensure the owner's requirements are met. This is why the agent cannot be a part of the design team or part of the team that holds the construction contracts for the project. So documentation of this prerequisite is fairly straightforward. The form has to be completed, and you must provide copies of the commissioning plan, table of contents, and summary, at least one functional performance test for each commissioned system, and the tables of contents for both the CFR and O&M plans. The next prerequisite is a big one. It's minimum energy performance. And the intent of this one is to reduce the environmental and economic harms of excessive energy use by achieving a minimum level of energy efficiency for the building and its systems. You have three options to demonstrate compliance. Option 1 is the whole building energy simulation, or your energy model. You must demonstrate a minimum of 5% improvement over the ASHRAE baseline building. One big thing to note is that you must now show that 5% improvement before any contributions from on-site renewable systems. That was not always the case in previous versions of the rating system, but V4 has clarified this. Option 2 is a prescriptive compliance path using the ASHRAE Advanced Energy Design Guides. This option requires that you demonstrate that you meet or exceed the requirements outlined in the AEDG, which equates to an approximate 50% improvement over the ASHRAE baseline. There are multiple design guides for specific project types like offices, schools, and retail, so you should select the one that is most applicable to your project. Option 3 is also a prescriptive compliance path, but this one references the Advanced Buildings Core Performance Guide. This is similar to option 2, but is specifically for projects less than 100,000 square feet. Additionally, healthcare, warehouse, and lab projects are ineligible to use this option. So, since option 1 involves the energy model, we're going to just quickly talk about the steps that your team needs to take to do that. First, you're going to engage your energy modeler, and this should be done at the planning stages of your project. The energy modeler is going to determine your climate zone using the ASHRAE requirements. It's important to confirm that your project complies with sections 5.4, 6.4, 7.4, 8.4, and 9.4 of ASHRAE 90.1 2010 version. These are the mandatory provisions that every project must meet in order to comply. Next, identify the energy use target for your building. You use Energy Star's Target Finder to do this. This number will give you an idea of where your building use should be at a minimum. For version 4, you have to develop a preliminary energy model. Most times you're going to do this as part of your process, however, not every project does. But on a good note, this step contributes to documenting integrated process, so if your project is attempting that credit, this documentation will contribute. Using that preliminary model, you then analyze potential HVAC systems for your design. Once decisions are made, you'll create the proposed design model. Then you'll create the baseline design model reflecting the requirements of Appendix G. And since energy modeling is a process, at some point you'll revise the proposed and baseline models to reflect your final design documents. Lastly, you'll determine your energy cost savings. Once all that's done, you'll document your project and you'll submit it to LEED for review. So documenting the prerequisite can be easy if you remember a few things. The current version of the form, which is shown here, mainly is an outline of the documentation requirements, and you no longer input the data from your model in the form. It's much more simplified. However, the form does give you clear guidance on the documentation you must upload for review. All of your detailed information is put into the Minimum Energy Performance Calculator, or MEPC, which is a more robust version of the old Supplemental Table 1.4 for those of you that are familiar with that document. Let's look at the MEPC a little bit now. This spreadsheet includes built-in calculators, tabs for each section of documentation, areas to enter your exceptional calculations, and to enter your information about on-site renewable energy systems. It also spells out the requirements from Appendix G in the last tab where your results are entered, and it will identify any potential issues that would require an explanation to the reviewer, like unusual numbers of equivalent full load hours, demand values that exceed values reported elsewhere in the spreadsheet, and potential issues with your baseline HVAC system. So the screen is showing a few pages from the MEPC document. There's a tab for each of the major pieces: envelope components, lighting, HVAC systems, both airside and waterside, service heating water, and lastly, the simulation results. An important thing to remember is to complete the spreadsheet in its entirety as it applies to your project. Read through the reminders of the requirements and address the issues that are highlighted for you on the results page. If there are any complex or super detailed items in your building or within your model, provide a narrative explanation. A narrative goes a long way for reviewers who have just a fraction of the time that you have to get to know your building. Okay, moving on. The intent of the building level energy metering prerequisite is to support energy management and identify opportunities for additional energy savings by tracking building level energy use. You're required to install a permanent building level meter or submeters that can give you building level data about your energy consumption. Each end use, like gas, electric, or propane, must have its own meter, and you must commit to sharing your data with USGBC for 5 years. Now, you're not required to meter any locally generated sources like an on-site PV system. This screenshot outlines the documentation requirements, which now includes an owner letter of commitment. And 2 items of note is that this is a brand new prerequisite. And while it sounds like a new big requirement, your utility meters actually comply with the requirements. So there isn't much more to do as far as requirements other than the letter of commitment. The next prerequisite, fundamental refrigerant management, is pretty much the same as it was in version 3. The intent is to reduce stratospheric ozone depletion. The requirements, you still can't use CFC-based refrigerant in any refrigerant-containing equipment. All refrigerant-containing equipment with 1/2 pound or more of refrigerant must be included for compliance. And one item that oftentimes gets excluded is commercial kitchen equipment. While base building equipment is what is required to be included, commercial kitchen equipment becomes part of that requirement because of the permanence of the equipment, especially in projects that include a commercial kitchen or if the project is a restaurant. The documentation requirements are fairly simple. The form shown here includes a table that must be completed listing all of the equipment included for compliance. You aren't required to provide cut sheets or any other details, but they can be requested by the reviewer if there are any inconsistencies with what is listed between the form and what is shown elsewhere in the project documentation. So our first credit is enhanced commissioning. The intent is to further support the design, construction, and eventual operation of a project that meets the owner's project requirements for energy, water, indoor environmental quality, and durability. So this one is slightly different from version 3 in that envelope commissioning is now an option for compliance. And because of this, you may attempt only envelope commissioning without option 1, which is the standard path for enhanced commissioning. The requirements for documenting this credit are providing the results of the commissioning, typically the commissioning plan. Ensure the plans for training and ongoing commissioning are included in this report. If you're pursuing path 2, you must include the measurement points that you've used. Option 2 requires demonstrating that the envelope commissioning was completed, so you probably want to provide the report from that. Enhanced commissioning is sometimes affected by the use of district energy systems. For every project that uses DES, all downstream equipment must be commissioned. However, if you're taking credit for the upstream equipment in the plant, those systems must also be part of the commissioning scope of work. But remember, if you're not claiming credit for the plant in the energy model, only your downstream equipment is required to be included. The next credit, Optimize Energy Performance, is really just a placeholder for the points awarded after demonstrating savings in the prerequisite minimum energy performance. However, when using option 1, you must provide documentation to show that the project team analyzed efficiency measures, which we discussed a few slides back. If you document integrated process, that information should be sufficient for this credit as well. If integrated process is not attempted, provide some sort of documentation like your preliminary model results, meeting notes, or a detailed narrative explaining your analyzation process. This is part of the table that indicates the point thresholds. For version 4, the thresholds have been lowered since ASHRAE 90.1 2010 is now the reference standard. The minimum percent improvement needed for points is 6% in new construction. And remember, we said the minimum requirement for the prerequisite is 5%. Each rating system has different thresholds, like major renovation projects or core and shell. Advanced energy metering is a new credit for version 4. The intent is to support energy management and identify opportunities for additional energy savings by tracking building level and system level energy use. In order to earn points, you must install submeters for all energy sources and any individual end uses that make up 10% or more of your total annual energy use. This number is easily gotten from your energy model. Once you've determined your meters, a list of the meters and equipment cut sheets for those meters are the required documentation. In order for the submeters to comply, they must have the characteristics as shown here. So they've got to be permanently installed, record at intervals of 1 hour or less, and transmit data to a remote location. Electric meters have to record both consumption and demand. Your data collection system must use a local area network, building automation system, wireless network, or something comparable. System must be capable of storing all data for at least 36 months. Your data must be remotely accessible, and the meters must be capable of reporting hourly, daily, monthly, and annual energy use. Demand response is another new credit. The intent of this is to increase participation in demand response technologies and programs that make energy generation and distribution systems more efficient, increase grid reliability, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There are 2 compliance options. Case 1 is for projects where a demand response program is available. Case 2 is for instances where programs are not yet available. In order to document this one, you'll need to provide evidence of the ability to shed 10% of your peak demand, confirmation that your system is capable of receiving and acting on an external signal, an action plan for meeting the reduction requirement during an event, and proof that you've included demand response in your commissioning system's testing plan. The only difference between using the 2 options is that under option 1, you must also provide evidence that your project has enrolled in an active program. This credit, renewable energy production, intends to reduce the environmental and economic harms associated with fossil fuel energy by increasing self-supply of renewable energy. So to demonstrate compliance here, you're going to be required to calculate the energy costs offset by renewable energy. That simple calculation is shown here. If you're using an energy model, the annual energy costs determined by the model must be used in this calculation. Additionally, the utility rates used in this credit and in optimized energy performance must be consistent. If you're pursuing an option other than the energy model, the renewable energy production calculation should use energy cost as determined using the CBEX database. Points for this credit are earned based on the table shown here. A max of 3 points is earned when you're at the 10% threshold. Exemplary performance is available for this credit at a minimum of 15% renewable energy. And new to version 4 is that community systems and solar gardens are now allowed for compliance, provided that the additional requirements that LEED outlines are met. Something important to remember with renewable energy is that there are many options that are allowed, like PV, wind, and solar thermal. Some instances for geothermal and biofuels are also allowed under certain circumstances. For example, geothermal used in conjunction with vapor compression cycles is not allowed, so this rules out taking credit for ground source heat pump systems. However, you can still model those systems for credit in the energy model. To document credit for on-site systems, you should provide calculations that include the system capacity, the energy generated, and the equivalent cost of that energy. The other 2 types of systems must also provide the same documentation. However, for on-site third-party systems, you have to also provide a copy of a fully executed contract for the system, which should specify the duration of the contract. And when you're using a community system, you must also provide documentation to show the percentage of the system that's owned by the project or the person. The credit for enhanced refrigerant management is pretty much the same as it was in version 3. There's still option 1 for use of no refrigerants, and option 2, which uses the refrigerant impact calculation. For the calculations, in option 2, it's important to use the correct values for leakage rate and refrigerant loss. Your equipment life values should reflect the standard values shown here in Table 2. So the documentation for this, aside from the calculations, can include cut sheets, but they're not required unless the reviewer questions the values that you've included in the calculations. On the screen here is the calculator, which is included in the form. And like the prerequisite, all equipment containing at least 1/2 pound or more of refrigerant must be included in the calculations. That includes kitchen equipment, refrigerators, and freezers. Now there are some special circumstances you should be aware of for this credit. District energy systems require 2 sets of calculations. 1, calculate the refrigerant impact using only the downstream equipment. The other is to calculate the refrigerant impact using only the upstream equipment. So if both calculations meet the credit requirements, you've demonstrated compliance. If neither calculation meets the credit requirements, you are not eligible to achieve this credit. However, if one calculation fails but the other passes, compliance can be demonstrated by using a weighted average refrigerant impact for the building. The other is VRF systems, which are much more commonplace than just even a few years ago. These systems may or may not comply with the credit requirements because they're refrigerant heavy, and all refrigerant within the system must be accounted for in the calculations. This includes your indoor units, outdoor units, and all interconnecting piping. So typically, in the calculations, the expected refrigerant charge should be between 3 and 6 pounds of refrigerant per ton. When you submit for this, you're going to want to include for your VRF system a calculation of how you determine the refrigerant charge was calculated. Green power and carbon offsets is an expanded version of the old green power credit. So the intent here is to encourage the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions through the use of grid source, renewable energy technologies, and carbon mitigation projects. Under version 4, the contract term must be for a minimum of 5 years, and the thresholds have been moved to 50 and 100%. There's also no longer an exemplary performance path for green power. Lastly, carbon offsets must be purchased for your natural gas usage, along with the RECs that you would already purchase for electricity use. Carbon offsets are new to version 4. There was a LEED interpretation for version 3 that allowed the use of them, but now they're required. The documentation requirements for this one are to provide calculations showing your annual electricity and non-electricity energy use. The calculations showing the required amount of RECs, green power, carbon offsets based on your targeted point threshold. You need to provide a fully executed purchase contract showing the RECs, green power, or carbon offsets that are consistent with the calculations. And if your purchase for green power is not Greenie certified, you're going to have to provide a Greenie equivalency documentation. That's fully outlined in the reference guide. So you're going to want to make sure that your calculations use the annual building electricity consumption that's consistent with your energy model. The other thing to remember is that that purchase contract must be signed by both the green power provider and your project owner in order to be fully executed. Now we've gone quickly through all of the prereqs and credits for the energy and atmosphere category. And this checklist here allows you to see that there are 33 total available points for the category. That's nearly 1/3 of the total 110 points available across all of the categories. So this category carries a lot of weight, and with good planning, you can achieve a significant number of points, putting your project in a great position for certification, even at a gold or platinum level. So we've talked exclusively about LEED today, but there are other rating systems as well, which pursue different goals, like Living Building Challenge, WELL, Passive House, and BREEAM. While the end goals may be different, using any of these rating systems will serve to document and confirm your building's sustainability pursuits. Every project is different, and while LEED can accommodate most project types, it doesn't fit every project. You may be interested in pursuing a different rating system. If that's the case, give me a call and I'd be happy to talk about your particular situation and which rating system is right for you. SRI and 3R have the experience with the process and the skills needed to help companies be successful in the pursuit of their sustainability goals. And if you're not considering certification, but want to design or improve your building to get maximum benefit, we can help with that too. Although I must say there is a lot of brand value to be realized from having that plaque and what it stands for. So I would highly encourage you to consider certification if at all possible. When you are pursuing your LEED certification, you can call us to help. At the very least, make sure you involve someone who can look at your situation and provide a realistic assessment of how you should pursue your LEED certification. With the right partners on your team, LEED certification can be easy and beneficial, both for your financial and environmental commitments. Of course, if we can help in any other way, we have listed some of our other 3R, CSR, and built environment services here. Thank you for attending the LEED Project Series Part 5, documenting the credits in energy and atmosphere category. And please look for the rest of the series, available in coming weeks, where we'll dive into the details of the additional LEED credit categories. Thank you.